Bienvenidos, señoras y señores, to another episode of the Bleed Lows podcast. This episode of the Bleed Lows podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting, and your favorite casino and card games are available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use our mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts. And joining us on the Carne Asada is one of my favorites. He is the maestro de bronca. He writes the columns that actually make you think, and he asks the questions that you guys want to ask, but you guys don't have the balls to do it. And that is Dylan Hernandez. Dylan, ¿cómo estás, amigo?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you for the very generous introduction there. I don't know if it's as stuff as you say, but it's a nice.
Hey, man. I've been there, Dylan. I know how people they get a little nervous when they see you coming around. Like, what is he going to ask? What is he going to ask? They're legit questions.
Yes, yeah, and that's what we're kind of trying to get to the bottom of, right? I mean, especially kind of right now in this era of team operated media and stuff. So much of what you get is just and they as a result, I think they feel they can restrict a lot of access. So any opportunity you kind of have to maybe peek behind the window, right behind the curtain, that's at least what we're trying to do. So,
and that's the reason why I love having you on the show, because you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's like people tell us what the team wants to hear. And look, we need to hear a different opinion. You wrote an excellent piece on Shohei Ohtani. And so there's been some updates to it. And so I want to address those with you because, look, we want to have Dylan on the show because when it comes to Shohei, Dylan's the only guy I trust. As much as Justin Verlander's brother wants to say that he has inside information that the Angels probably leaked to him, Dylan is the guy that I trust when it comes to Ohtani. So, Dylan, when Perry Maniason comes out here and starts telling everybody, we were going to do an MRI, but Ohtani, declined it. How much of that damage control, and is anyone buying that?
Yeah, I think it's actually true, right? And actually, this goes to the point that I was making, which is that, in this relationship between the Angels and Ohtani just told them what he was doing. Right. And so, they had kind of created this relationship where, to me, this actually really emphasizes the point that I was trying to make, which is that the Angels kind of lost control of this beast, so to speak. Right. And now, don't get me wrong. Right. The players of a certain caliber, it's hard for a team to tell them what to do. Right. And if you think, that the Dodgers have any more control of Clayton Kershaw than the Angels have over Ohtani, I'd be telling you, like, well, it's probably not the case, right? And the thing is, in Ohtani's case, again, we have to kind of go back 6 years here to when he first made the decision to come to the major leagues. And, right, I think when he chose the Angels, a lot of us were like, what the, why is he, I can cuss on this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We were like, what the fuck, right? And why would he pick the Angels? And I think that as time went on, it became very clear why he did. He chose the Angels because his priority was to play both ways. And the reality is that a lot of the other teams that were here, right, in the major leagues weren't totally sold on him, especially as a hitter. My understanding actually that in Ohtani's head, it was kind of the opposite, that he thought he was a better hitter than he was a pitcher, and that he thought that he needed his bat to buy time for his arm, right? But either way, like, he wanted to go to a place that was going to be as committed to making him a two-way player as he was. And so he went to a team, frankly, that wasn't very good, right? And, because if he had gone to the Dodgers, and I don't know if you guys remember, but I think that first spring training, his ERA was like 7. He batted like under 200.
That's what Francesa was saying. Thank God the Yankees didn't get this guy. This guy's going to be the biggest bust in the world.
Right. Yeah. And, if he's on the Dodgers at that point, he might get optioned. Right. Yeah. And if he's not, it could have been a case of like, hey, like, we want you to be part of the rotation, but we don't think you can hit, or we think you can hit, but we don't think you can pitch, or whatever it was. The Angels, especially the Dodgers as a perennial contender, had kind of the weight to say that, right? Because it's like, hey, like, look, we're trying to play for a playoff spot here. We don't have time to be like dicking around with your little like side project here. What were the Angels going to do, right? And it's very important again to also remember that when he was in Japan and he broke in with the Nippon Ham Fighters, they were kind of in a similar situation as the Angels kind of were, right? Yu Darvish had just left. They were in this kind of complete rebuild. And it took him a few years to kind of find his footing as a two-way player. And by the time he was kind of like ramped up and ready to go, the young players around him in that rebuilding project were now ready to contend, and they went on and won a championship. My guess is that that's what he envisioned for his time with the Angels, is that, okay, but, it's going to take me a few years to figure this out. But when I do, the team will also be kind of on the rise, and we can contend. Now, that part didn't happen, right? But I do think that, like, as time kind of went on and the Angels were just so invested in, again, making him like this two-way guy, because frankly, they didn't have much else going for them. Right. Once and this happens in human relationships too, right? Right. And the way you talk to your kids, your wife, I mean, these are patterns that get developed over time. And once a relationship is kind of established and the rules of engagement are in place, it's hard to redo that. And so it had kind of gotten to this point where, like, yeah, like Ohtani's clearly the driver in this thing, right? And, so yeah, it came out, I do think that the Angels, they were taking a lot of heat, my suspicion is that, the one thing about the Angels is clearly they want to resign Ohtani. They have been very, very careful in what they've said about Ohtani, right? The one thing that's, I think, really fascinating is Ohtani will not talk about, like, his routine. What does he do every day, right? The weird thing is about this is that you ask anybody in the Angels organization, they won't tell you either, right? And so there's kind of this like, okay, Ohtani doesn't want this out there, so we're not going to put it out there. They are very, very careful with how they talk about it, right? Phil Nevin, who for the most part is kind of like a fairly straight shooter, I think. We saw him in the dugout kind of explode the other day and post game saying, hey, this isn't good enough. Again, kind of the one area where he speaks very carefully is about Ohtani. They do not want to rock that boat. So when I see Minasian saying this, that's telling me that Ohtani probably gave him the, hey, you know what? You guys have been taking a lot of heat over this. Obviously, in the end, I was responsible, so you can put it out there that, like, I declined, this opportunity to undergo an MRI exam. Now, that does in some way, Ohtani's basically shouldering part of the blame here. At the same time, that doesn't change this reality that the Angels weren't in position to tell him, no, you know what, like, something doesn't look right. Until you take an MRI, we're not going to let you pitch again, for example. They were not in position to do that, right? Again, because of the way their relationship had been established already. So to me, again, I think when I look at that, to me, it's like a nice gesture, I think, on Ohtani's part, where, he feels a certain amount of gratitude, I would imagine, to the Angels for having, created the conditions to let him become the player he is right now. I mean, this isn't all bad, by the way, right? Because of this long leash that he was given, he was able to have a 3-year stretch that's been unprecedented in baseball history. Trust me, because if he's with the Dodgers, there is no way he's a two-way player at the level that he is right now. There's just no way it happens, right? And with a lot of other teams, I don't think it happens. So I think that was kind of the, again, Japan, it's very much like an obligation-based society, right? People are very conscious of, favors that were done to them, and they feel the need to repay and stuff. And to me, I look at this and it's like Ohtani's basically saying, hey, you know what? Put some of the blame on me. Now, again, to me, though, that doesn't change this larger issue that basically the Angels kind of lost control of this thing. And at some point, I do think you are the employer, it is kind of your job to be in control of things, and they just kind of weren't in control here.
We're talking to the most feared journalist in Los Angeles, and he wrote an excellent piece on Shohei Ohtani's injury and the relationship with the Angels, which I suggest everyone check it out. Look, guys, come on. It doesn't hurt to read. It's for your health. Just pay whatever the $1 or $2 is to get the subscription and read the LA Times. Dylan, it's interesting that you mentioned that. So Ben Verlander is sitting here saying that he's got inside sources telling him that this injury is not that bad. Now, They haven't decided yet if he does need surgery. But if he does, this is going to be his second UCL. And everything that you're first of all, have you heard anything? Do we know how bad this second injury is?
So we don't know the severity. I think what we have heard, and I think, and Ben put this out there too, is that it's in a different place, right? It's not the same exact injury. Now, so when they're saying, okay, they haven't decided on a course of action yet, right? It could be bad, right? I mean, my guess is, okay, so if surgery isn't like 100%, that means it's probably not like a complete tear, right? Now, that said, that would be like a pretty disastrous scenario. Like most of these tears are not complete tears, right? They're things are partially torn and you kind of stitch the thing back together. And again, I'm going to go back to the 18 thing, right? So early in the season, Ohtani goes down with elbow problems. He opts for PRP treatment, and then he came back and he blew out. And it could be a case again where, he's thinking, okay, I'm going to be 30. I'm not in a position right now to like basically spend a year not pitching at all if I want to remain a two-way pitcher. So maybe let's do the PRP, and hopefully that kind of works out, and if it does, right, and I can keep pitching, great, right? I haven't really lost all too much then. So that's my guess. Again, I'm not basing this on anything that I know. That's just kind of my guess as to why they haven't quite taken that next step yet, right? And he has, again, his history has been one that he didn't undergo surgery in 18 until he had to, right? He went with the PRP option first. So my guess is that they're going to explore that, as much as possible, as long as, my guess is if he's told, like, hey, there's no way you're right, your ligament is going to hold up, you're going to Tommy John no matter what, by postponing it and by doing the PRP thing, all you're doing is delaying your return by 6 months, 8 months, whatever. Then my guess is that he's going to wind up undergoing surgery. But again, I think that if there's probably a possibility that he might be able to kind of PRP his way through this thing, right? And that's the thing, right? Is that bodies kind of respond differently to everything. Takashi Saito, remember when the Dodgers let him go? He was patient zero, by the way, on PRP, right? And he came back to pitch in the playoffs. I think that was in 2008, right, against the Cubs. Yeah. And and that was the thing, right? They thought obviously the Dodgers let him go because they thought this guy's elbow's done, and he wound up pitching 10 more years. So weird things like that happen, right? I mean, there are certain pitchers, you hear about, because at that point, nobody's arm is normal, right? You pitch that many innings at the professional level. And some guys look, right, you look into their shoulders and it's like, man, there's no way this guy can pitch. And somehow it kind of works out. So, there's kind of that miracle possibility. My guess is that that's what he's holding out for.
You made a very compelling argument right now on the show, and I think in your piece also. I'm curious if you got any pushback, because I know when people first heard about your piece, they were like, why would this improve the Angels' chances of re-signing him? How can you trust a guy? How can you trust an organization that has now allowed you to get hurt like this? Or like you said in your article, didn't protect you against yourself. But it sounds like what you're telling me, Dylan, is he runs the show. So it's better. What's the saying? The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. And I don't want to mix metaphors here between the Angels and the Devils. But here's the thing, right? Is that not a compelling argument for him to re-sign with the Angels, knowing that I can do whatever the hell I want in this organization?
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing, right? Is I think that, and it's hard to kind of tell where Ohtani's mind is and where his priorities are because he doesn't say stuff very much, right? And so, there have been two, I think, in the last 6 years, like 2 times he's really spoken. One time was actually before he came from Japan. He held a press conference in Tokyo, and he got asked, for example, your goal, is to be the best baseball player in the world. He got asked about a World Series. He says, well, to be the best player in the world, I think winning a World Series is a prerequisite for that. And the other thing he said that was very interesting was, he got asked, how much will you insist on being a two-way player? And he talked about, right, because right now we're looking at this and we're like, yeah, it all worked out, whatever. But you know what? At the time, even in Japan, there was a lot of resistance to this idea, right? Kind of the Goose Gossages of Japanese baseball, the Hall of Famer, get off my lawn guys. No, seriously, right? We're like saying that this is disrespectful to the other players that you would even try this, right? And really, it was a small group of people at the Nippon Ham Fighters who were like, you can do this, and we're going to support you to do this, right? So what he said at that time, and this was in late 2017, before he got posted, he said, I don't feel like that's just mine anymore. The whole two-way thing, right? I feel I think what he was trying to say was that he felt that he owed it to the people that helped him realize that vision to continue to do that, right? That this is his way of saying thank you to them. And again, like when he came over here again, I think it was very clear he went to an organization that was going to let him play both ways. Now, in the interim, what's happened, right, in late September of 2021, the Angels had lost like 50 billion games in a row again, spiraling out of control. Things got so bad there, right? Trout was hurt. Ohtani was leading the league in home runs, and then they basically just stopped pitching to him because there's no one else in the lineup. So he didn't even win the home run title. And kind of at the apex of his like fury, he unloads and says, I like it here. I love the fans. However, my desire to win is stronger, right? So we have these two things, right? One is that clearly he does want to be a two-way player, but also he wants to win, And so the questions are going to be now about like how does he prioritize these things? My guess is that if he wins, he wants to win like as a two-way player. Last year at the All-Star game, right, the one that was at Dodger Stadium, kind of in the day before, media availability thing, right? And players are just like sitting ducks there, by the way. It's great if you're a reporter. You just have a player just sitting at the table. He's like, you got him for like 45 minutes. You can't go anywhere. And so there, I asked him about the Hall of Fame, and his kind of wishes of getting into the Hall of Fame and stuff. And the one thing that he told me was like, yeah, like I am mindful of it. That is why I came to the United States at 23 instead of 25, right? Because had he waited 2 more years and come as a 25-year-old, he's an unrestricted free agent. People were throwing around like a $200 million number. He signed for $2 million. So basically punted on $200 million to improve his chances of going into the Hall of Fame. So what that tells me is that he is legacy driven, right? So, now when you kind of throw all these things into like one thing, right, and try to figure out, okay, how is he going to prioritize everything? And again, this is just me speculating because he hasn't said this himself. But my guess is, like what would be the greatest way for him to leave the greatest legacy possible? You think of sports, you think of Michael Jordan, or you think of, the Chicago Bulls. What do you think of? You think of Michael Jordan. You think, take soccer. You think of Napoli. You think of Maradona, right? Mm-hmm. Napoli just won the Serie A title last year. It doesn't matter. You think of Maradona first, right? Mm-hmm. Where kind of that, and it's hard, I think, to do that in baseball, right? Like it's a sport that's been around so long. There's so many great names, but it doesn't matter, who's at the Yankees. You're never going to be bigger than the Yankees, you know? And in some way, the greatest like individual achievement, I think, would be if he could somehow take the Angels and take them to the World Series, right, as like a two-way guy, right? At that point, I think everybody would say, you know what, this is the greatest player of all time. Barry Bonds couldn't win a World Series by himself. I mean, they had Kent and stuff, right? They're actually a pretty decent team, but like even Barry Bonds couldn't win a World Series. So like if this guy can do it, and he can do it with an organization like the Angels, and again, I think that the two-way thing is a big part of his priority. And so like we're almost in some ways kind of back to where we were 6 years ago. He's going to look for a place that is going to be as committed to this two-way project as he is. And to me, the issue isn't next year, right? It's not 24, assuming he has surgery, right? Because he's not going to pitch. The issue is in 25. And again, I'm going to go back to, the first surgery, right? He blew out in 18, had an operation, doesn't pitch 19, comes back in 20 in that COVID season. I think he pitched like 2 games, and then just basically he didn't feel right. He shut it down for the year. So now again, imagine if the recovery isn't necessarily going to be linear, and it wasn't last time. So let's just assume, this is going to be a stop and go. This is going to be, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 5 steps forward, 2 steps back, and you're kind of not sure. Again, let's say you sign with a team like the Dodgers. It could be kind of hard, right? I mean, it's going to be all of a sudden now it's like, hey, we're competing for like a championship here. Now all of a sudden we're going to have to like bump back every starter 2 days because you need to come in and do your thing. And who knows? Maybe the Dodgers are willing to accommodate him, right? Maybe all the pluses, baseball doesn't have superstars anymore, except for maybe him. right? De La Cruz, I guess, is maybe kind of getting to that point, but like, it's not, this isn't the NBA, this isn't the NFL. Maybe the Dodgers, right? The whole commercial appeal of the whole thing, they're willing to accommodate, right? Or maybe, in a lot of these cases, it's an ownership thing, right? If they're going to spend that much money. Maybe Mark Walter becomes obsessed with Ohtani and just, just make this work. But even then, like, I don't think if you're Ohtani, how can you be sure of this, right? How can you be sure that somebody's going to like honor their word? And the one thing too is like, in the United States, I think, right, it's kind of a cultural thing. Unless like you just like bold-faced lie, just say something that's just categorically untrue, it's not considered lying, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you mislead somebody but didn't technically lie,
Yeah.
that's not considered a lie in our country, right? And keep in mind, like in most places, like that makes you a liar,
Yes.
And so I think that like, well, Ty's been living here for 6 years. He's got to know the way our culture works. Like, how can you trust anybody here, right? There's one team that he knows will be committed to bring him back as a two-way guy. That's the Angels, because they've done it already. They'll do it again, And what else? It's like, what else do they have to play for, right? So I just think that from that standpoint, again, if he wants to remain a two-way guy, that is, he knows that there's one team that'll help him get back, do everything in his power to get back to that point, and it's the team that he's been on.
Well, there you have it. I mean, we are a Dodgers show. You answered my question. I was going to transition into this. Hearing you talk to me, it seems like there's no way the Dodgers are going to assign Ohtani next year. But you know that organization very well, Dylan. I mean, everything that you're telling me, the fact that he's so established now, you mentioned that 3-year run of him doing it two ways. Could the Dodgers really get away with saying, hey, man, we don't want you to do this two-way. You're hurt. Just focus on the hitting. Or like you said now, is it just the fact that Ohtani is so dead set against this? And you're right. If he goes to the Dodgers, he's never going to be bigger than the Dodgers, right? So what are the chances? Because the Dodgers, we all know they don't have a problem signing injured pitchers. They have no issue with that. What are the chances that the Dodgers could legitimately make a run at Ohtani?
So I think they're going to try, right? Because if Ohtani's not pitching this year, he's still the MVP, right? I mean, he's probably still the best offensive player in the game. So you can use him, right? Obviously I've kind of described like two extreme scenarios, right? One, which is like they're going to accommodate you in every way possible, and the other where they don't. There is an in-between, right? There is a scenario, I would say, like, hey, like where they talk to him and say, hey, you know what? We think that if you make, instead of 700 plate appearances a year, you do 600, and maybe we find a way to like limit you to 120 innings a year, right? And gradually ramp you up to pitch like in October. I mean, they could try to sell him on something like that. And again, and I don't know, it's hard for me to tell you, like, will he accept that? I'm not sure. Maybe, right? Maybe getting hurt has made him realize, like, hey, I'm not Superman here. Maybe this is the smart thing to do. Maybe they can convince him of that. I don't know. The one thing that I think that is kind of like in, the Dodgers' favor here is they do have a history, right? Before he signed with the Nippon Ham Fighters, it looked like he was going to sign with the Dodgers out of high school, right. Then Nippon Ham basically came, like, at that point, by the way, Ohtani had told teams in Japan, do not draft me because I am going to the United States. The Nippon Ham Fighters ignore, and the draft in Japan is weird because every team can pick the same guy if they want, right? And what happens if more than one team picks a guy, they have like a lottery. And, so like you say six, right, this happens all the time. Six, right? If there's like a really big prospect, six teams will draft like one player, and then they have a drawing and one team ends up with them. So anyway, Ohtani told all the teams, do not draft me. Nippon Ham was the one team that did. And the way they kept him in Japan and convinced him not to come to the United States was they offered him the opportunity to play both ways. Right. So there is this history here. And you know what? He could say, Kuriyama, by the way, he was the manager of the Japan's WBC team, and he was the Ohtani's manager at Nippon Ham, and he was kind of talking about how, right, like the way he sold this to Ohtani was like, hey, your dream is to be a star in the major leagues. This is going to be your shortcut there, actually, right? Rather than, riding buses and going to all these small towns and, having to deal with like a language that you're not familiar with and all that. We can create this comfortable environment for you. You're playing like at a high level. You can learn how to do it both ways here. We'll control everything for you so that when you go over there, you right, and you can go there at a relatively young age, you'll be ready to do this at that level, right? This is a shortcut for you. So I do think what Ohtani could say theoretically is, hey, you know what? This was the team. The Dodgers were the team I was always going to sign with, right? This was my destiny, so to speak. And I've had to take a couple of detours on the way there, but eventually I ended up where I was supposed to end up. Now, the other side of this is that I think Ohtani, the one thing, and I visited, in 2017 and his last year in Japan, I visited with his high school coach. So I went into like the Japanese countryside. He's from kind of like the Japanese equivalent of like Arkansas, right? And I'm not making fun of it because my mom is from like a place like that, right? It's just like rice fields everywhere. Uh-huh. And anyway, his high school coach told me, because at some point I very flippantly said, well, he's going to end up with the Dodgers or the Yankees, right? And the guy tells me, I don't think so, because, and again, one thing is that in Japan, high school baseball is the biggest thing that they have going, right? The National High School Baseball Tournament, it's a Super Bowl and March Madness rolled into one, right? The tournament just ended right now, Koshien, and a kind of a well-known high school just won, so it's become like kind of a big deal. It's the biggest story in the country. And so at the high school level, they're recruiting nationally, right? And so the biggest teams tend to be, right, the powerhouse schools tend to be concentrated like in Osaka, Yokohama. He had the opportunity to go to a place like that. Yet he stayed in rural Iwate because he wanted to do something no one had done before, because no team from that region, that area of the country, like Darvish actually kind of went to school somewhat nearby over there, like in that area, part of kind of the northern part of the mainland. No team from that area has ever won Koshien before. And so Ohtani wanted to be the first, and that's why he stayed, right? So this is a guy, he said, the guy told me, this is a guy who wants to do something that other people haven't done, right? And if you think back to it, when he told teams in Japan, hey, I'm going straight to the United States, no player had made the jump from Japanese high school to the United States before, right? When they convinced him to stay, it was because they offered him an opportunity to play both ways, which obviously no one had done before. When he was coming from Japan to here, again, kind of cue all the Japanese goose gossages, were saying like, hey, baseball over there is not going to be that easy. He should really just focus on one, right? What did he do? People think I can't do this. I'm going to show them, And so there's a part of me that wonders, right? Everybody, because this is kind of unanimous, by the way, right? And keep in mind, like, Japan has this history with the Dodgers, going back to Nomo, obviously. Japan loves the Dodgers, right? It's a popular team. There is this kind of feeling in the air. He's going to go to the Dodgers. Of course he's going to go to the Dodgers. He should go to the Dodgers. And because everybody's saying that, I kind of wonder if his contrarian nature might say, you know what? I'm not going to do that just because everybody says I should.
And okay, this is again the reason why I wanted to talk to you about Ohtani. And it's like, for those of you who don't know, Dylan is half Japanese. So you can bring in the cultural aspects of what's going to be involved here. And you had mentioned this before. Has Ohtani become Americanized in the sense that he understands capitalism? Because I think what your article brings out, which is very interesting to me, is how much money he has lost, how much money he lost at the beginning of his career, how much money possibly has he lost already now with this injury going into next year. Is there a possibility that Ohtani looks at his mortality now and starts weighing what's more important, how much longer I can do this? Or is this my last opportunity to make up all this money that I lost already? Does that matter to this dude? Or is this guy just really a unicorn in all aspects of life?
Yeah, I'm, having watched him now in this last month, it's funny, right? Because you have these debates with people around baseball. And obviously, people that are kind of work in and around Major League Baseball, mostly Americans, right? So they view things through like an American prism. And we've always we've been debating this. I've been having debates with people all over the place about this, about how much does money matter to this guy. Now, my opinion previously was that, okay, there's going to be a bar for entry. say it's 500 million, 450 million, 500, whatever it is, right? There's going to be kind of a bar for entry. I would think that he's going to want the record, right, contract kind of for a prestige reasons, not because he actually needs the money. Mm-hmm. But that once that bar has been cleared, right? So say there are 8 teams that are willing to clear that bar. I don't think the difference is, say, going to be between, okay, one team offered him 700 million and the other offered him 500, right? Even if that's like a crazy difference, I don't think that's going to decide where he goes. I think he's going to decide like what kind of baseball player he wants to be and what kind of baseball environment and what kind of goals that does he have. I don't think the money is going to make a difference there. Mm-hmm. At least that's what I thought for most of this year. Having watched him in the last couple of weeks, I'm now convinced that money does not mean anything to this guy whatsoever. Right? Like zero to the point where, and again, like just so that you know where the other arguments are coming from, right? So Ohtani in the last year, especially this past offseason, did a bunch of, right? He's now endorses Hugo Boss and I think maybe like Rolex, or some kind of high end watch, everything, right? And so he did like a bunch of like advertisements, and some of the baseball people who I spoke to, obviously, right, people are always going to Japan and they're like, dude, he's like everywhere now, right? He's doing so many advertisements. Like, of course he loves money, right? It's just, the thing is though about that, every brand that Ohtani endorses, it's a high end brand, right? It's like the pinnacle of like whatever it is, like the fanciest clothes, the best watch, best car, best this, best that. So to me, it's just he wants to be associated with, high level brands because he himself is a high level brand. I think, again, so I don't think this is about money. I think it's about prestige, right? So, you do, but like, right. And yeah, so now the question again, how much does the money mean to him? If you watch him, I mean, the fact that he took the mound the day he got hurt tells me he does not care at all, right? And we saw this, the Dodgers, obviously, the 21 playoffs, Scherzer.
Yeah.
This is the LCS. And he's like, something doesn't feel right. I'm not pitching. And the thing is, because it's in this kind of American capitalism environment, right, where like, and I don't know if it's kosher to say this, but I really do believe this. Like, money is God in this country, right? It is the thing that people hold in the highest regard and everything. And so he didn't get dragged, right? I mean, if he had tried to pull that crap in Japan, he would have been raked over the coals. And now forget even about like going to Japan, right? There are even some guys, right? I'm convinced 1,000%. Clayton Kershaw would have pitched that game. Kershaw's arm could have been like dangling by just like a literal string, and he would have been out there, and he might have given up 6 runs or whatever, and then he would have stood in front of his locker and accepted blame for all that, Now, you can argue, again, because this is about values, right? And everybody's got different value system. And, I think that the reason, right, you can talk about Kershaw's October failures, whatever. I'm guessing you guys as Dodger fans have a lot of respect and even like a lot of love for Kershaw because of the innings and the work and everything that he's put out there. You know what? Like, he might have not always succeeded, but he gave us everything, right? And so he gets something that's not financial, right? Scherzer will never be loved like that, right? But Scherzer just got $120 million also put his bank account at 40 that Kershaw's not going to get. And so it kind of becomes an issue of like, hey, like what's, but the fact that this kid, keep in mind too, they were like, I think they were already like 10 and a half, 11 and a half, 12 and a half out of the wild card. I mean, they're done, right? Like, I mean, it's one thing if like you're in it, like I kind of get, right? This guy clearly doesn't care, like, because he was just like, you know what? I'm going to exhaust every possibility. There's something so pure about this kid in a way, And if anything, I feel kind of bad in that, like, now that I look back on it, the last like few years, I've asked him like a lot of like semi-accusatory questions, right? In terms of like, okay, I know you're saying you don't think about free agency, but come on, right? Like, obviously you are, right? That was the implication behind many of my questions to him. And now that I've seen this, I'm kind of wondering, like, man, you know what? Maybe he really is what he says he is, Maybe he really, because he, after like a tough loss or something, he'll come out and split the cliches, and, especially the Japanese reporters who cover him on a daily basis are really kind of frustrated by how little he says,
Mm-hmm.
But he'll be like, hey, like, I got to turn the page and be ready for tomorrow. And on one hand, it's a cliche, but you know what he actually does? He actually does turn the page, and he shows up and he's ready to play tomorrow. He plays hard. This is the one thing, again, over the last month, it's become really clear. This guy, I don't know if you guys watch much Angels baseball at all, but this guy plays hard, right? This guy plays hard every day, and you just have to watch him run the bases. You
Yeah.
know, he could be down like 3-4 runs late in the game, no chance, right? Nobody behind him in the lineup. He's on first base. He's taking off for second. He's trying to, right? If there's even a 1% chance of him, like them making the playoffs, he's not going to, and that's his joy. That's his freedom, and I think to him, that's much more than any money. And again, he put his money in a way where his mouth was, right? And that, like, anybody else, there's no way, right? I mean, we see guys in their walkers, they're going on DLs all the time. I'm not going to name names here, but just look at the transaction log, right? Like, it should tell you the story. And this kid did not care. He had the biggest contract in the history of like North American sports at stake. He didn't care, right? He wanted to go out there and pitch for the right, the Angels, who are basically out of playoff contention. So, the funny thing about all this is we're sitting here talking about, like, how much did this cost him? Was it 100 million, 200 million? He might not care.
Yeah.
Right. I'm at this point, I'm not even sure, when I talked about there being a bar of entry, I don't even think there is a bar of entry anymore. It's going to be, again, about him and how he envisions his baseball career. And I think he's going to prioritize that over anything.
This is why I love having you on the show. You're not dumb, Dylan. I know you have a filter, but sometimes when I talk to you, I feel you don't have a filter, and you really you tell me what you're really thinking, and I love that. Babyface, you have a question for Dylan?
No, what Dylan said right now, that he said something interesting. He said how he likes, like, the best of the best, right? He promotes these brands. So do you think that in any way will fall in line with baseball, like the Dodgers, right, or the Yankees, right? Like, is he going to be drawn to one of those teams? And something we've discussed also too is, like, say if the Dodgers would win the World Series this year, right, and he sees that, like, would he take a step back and be like, do these guys really need me, right, to get them over that hump?
Yeah, I think that is like a question, right? It's like, because again, I think it's about his legacy, and his legacy as a baseball player. And you're right, like. And I think, again, that's kind of one thing that's like, the fact that now, it's funny though, right? With the Dodgers thing, it's like they won, and you kind of think of them, okay, the last decade, they're probably the best organization in baseball. One thing that might have kind of helped them is the fact that they didn't win in 21. Yeah. They fucked the pooch again last year. And right, you look back now and all these things, now that it's kind of happened, it's kind of like slightly diminished that 2020 championship, right? At least look, everybody was playing under those rules. I don't subscribe to that, but I'm just saying that, like, publicly, I think that there's like, okay, well, maybe, that wasn't like a real thing or whatever, right? And so the fact that they're kind of struggling, having trouble getting over that hump, I do think would kind of be like an appeal to Ohtani, right? And that, like, okay, I was the guy that kind of came in here. But something else to kind of keep in mind too, though, is the fact that, like, in Japan, there aren't many trades, right? Player movement within, like, the NPB is like relatively rare, right? And like, even I think to become like an unrestricted free agent, like in Japan, it takes like 9 years or something. I mean, like, your career is almost over at that point, like, there isn't a ton of movement. And if you do get traded, it's kind of like almost like they gave up on you. And there might be kind of this, and again, it's hard to tell because he doesn't talk, right? I do think, like, kind of using those Jordan and Maradona examples, kind of like, right, the thing that would be most prestigious would be for him to win with the Angels. I do wonder, part of him, that it's just kind of like, what, like, because this is another thing about in Japan, right, is that it's not so much about the destination as it is about the journey. I remember years ago when Hiroki Kuroda was with the Dodgers, and he started going year to year, right? And I think, like, in the last year, there was at one point, like, I think they were going to trade him to Detroit. Ned Colletti had worked out a deal to send him to the Tigers, but Kuroda had a no trade clause, and he said no. And like, Ned was furious, of course, afterwards. But the thing from Kuroda's standpoint, it's like, it's not the same as being winning as a rental guy, right? No. You didn't get the full experience. He goes like, I want to go to camp with the team and I'll play April and May and June and be part of a team for a whole year and then win, right? And, I do think a lot of times, you're right, you talk about people being right, like, Friedman loves to talk about process oriented. A lot of people do, right? We're process oriented. Dude, you have no idea. Anyone, any American who says that, like, trust me, you're not process oriented. You have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, because Japan is very process oriented. They're so process oriented that sometimes they forget about like what the point of the whole fucking thing is, which is to win, right? Like, they're gonna go out there and take their perfect swing like every time, and kind of like sometimes they kind of forget to like adjust to, right? And and you kind of wonder. I have wondered, honestly, does that kind of handicap them in competition sometimes? Now I do think guys like Ichiro, Ohtani, these guys are like geniuses, right? Because they can break through even that, right? And they're willing to like adapt and stuff. But yeah, like in terms of like him getting kind of like, I do think he's just like a remarkable athlete in terms, like, especially like mentally, right? I mean, I know like Phil Nevin a couple of times has called him like mentally the toughest athlete he's been around. To me, at first I used to kind of think, he's just saying that because he has to, whatever. Again, they're trying to re-sign him. But like, I really think that's true. I think he's exceptional, again, because all those cliches, right, that, one pitch at a time and all, whatever stuff, right? And you can always kind of roll your eyes. But the truth is that the most successful guys do live that. And I think Ohtani lives it to a degree that nobody else does, and so kind of like with that Dodger question, yeah, it's interesting, right? Because again, there is history there. Granted, the front office, nobody who was part of the organization back when they were recruiting him out of high school is still there, I don't think. But I think, part of it at the same time too is like, well, he's going to be kind of going into a situation that's already kind of, right, they're on the doorstep of the championship already. Is it quite the same as, again, in Japan, like with Nippon Ham, they went from like being a really bad team to champions, right? He got to live the entire arc. Now, again, he's 30 now, right? He's going to be 30. So he's got to consider that he's running out of time, So I think that there are all these, things that he's going to kind of have to factor in. And yeah, I think all those things could work in the Dodgers' favor. I think some of the stuff could work against them. And ultimately, I think it's going to come down to, he's pretty, when you kind of look at his, like, his objectives and stuff, they usually tend to be pretty simple, right? I want to do something no one else has done before. And so I think, again, he's going to have to take all those variables and kind of put it together, and, how he comes out with it. I don't know, I'll say this. He's a very, very smart kid. I very rarely say this about baseball players, that like, I think the guy's smarter than I am. I think this guy might really be smarter than me, like legitimately. His high school coach told me that he was like the second or third ranked student in his graduating class in Japan. His diction is pretty crazy, by the way. The whole thing is just so, he's coming from such, and when I watch him really, and again, like my impression of him this month, it's like, he's that high school player, at the Koshien tournament, right? And you hear these horror stories, right? Kid threw 1,200 pitches in a week, like Ohtani would do that, right? He would totally do it. He would welcome doing it. It was funny so I went to go visit him, I went to go see him in Japan in 2017. That's when I visited his high school. I went back in 2019. David Wharton and I went to Japan because, right, it was a year before the Tokyo Olympics. So we basically went to go report on, like, where are they in their preparations, whatever. We were supposed to make contacts over there and stuff. And so the day that we got there, the day we flew in, Roki Sasaki was supposed to be pitching in high school, right? The kid, he pitched in the WBC, the kid that sits at 100. And he's also from the same area that Ohtani's from, And a friend of mine who was covering that calls me and says, like, hey, like, we got, the game got rained out today. He's pitching tomorrow. Do you have anything going on? And I'm like, no, actually, it's the one day on our schedule that we're open. He's like, take the bullet train up here. I'll pick you up at the train station. We can go watch Roki, So I took the 3-hour train ride. It just so happened that the stadium that the game was being played, it was kind of like this public, municipal stadium type thing, was on kind of the same lot of land that Ohtani's high school is at. So I'm there. I'm back at the high school, and I figure, like, let me go say hi to the coach, right? So I go sit there. It's a couple hours before the game still. I go sit there, and he's hitting grounders to his team. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, okay, well, when he takes a breather, I'll go say hi, right? Fucker hit grounders for like 2 hours straight, man. Like, he never finished. I think at some point he like looked in my general direction the reporter that I was with told me like, hey, I think he nodded at you, but I'm not sure. I never got to find out because at some point I had to go watch Sasaki pitch. And this guy was still hitting, so it's just like the thing is over there, it's just kind of, again, it's baseball and sports are like spiritual exercises, right? It's to test your, and that doesn't necessarily, right? I mean, sometimes you push yourself past the point of exhaustion. It's not, and we know enough now to know that's not necessarily always the smartest thing to do. But I think that there is a lot of that, in Ohtani, right? I mean, he has been pushing himself for the last month. It's been obvious, like, why is he playing so hard, right? He's giving everything. And to me, really, he's that high school kid with like a dream, and that's really it, right? It's not about the money and all that other stuff. I really think that he's just a kid who has goals and is just trying to strive for them.
Dylan, I know you don't want to mention names, but before we segue to the Dodgers, I have a couple of questions with you about the Dodgers. But
okay,
you didn't want to mention names, but what the hell is going on with Anthony Rendon down in Anaheim? Sam Bloom was saying something the other day. I was like, I'm not even going to repeat the stuff that Rendon was saying in front of his locker. I know in your article you had mentioned they could just release him. This is a dude who said he didn't want to sign with the Dodgers. It sounds like the Dodgers dodged a bullet because of the Hollywood lifestyle, but he sounds like a diva down there. What's going on with Anthony Rendon?
Yeah, I mean, right, the surface level thing is, I mean, he's just hurt. He can't stay healthy. And right, he's just an asshole, I guess, right? It's kind of the easiest. If you want to dig a little deeper into kind of the psyche behind it, right, I would, because he has always kind of had this like too cool for school type thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is just my opinion, right? I haven't talked to him about this. I don't really know him like that. But like, I don't think you become that good at anything if you're not like dedicated to it, right? And right, there are always people like that. You knew them at school, like, right? They study like crazy. Oh, I didn't study at all. They want to, right? I kind of have a feeling that that's kind of what's going on with them, right? Is that this actually means more to him than, like, a lot more to him than he's letting on, that he's actually having a lot of trouble kind of dealing with this whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's unfortunate, right, in a lot of cases is that like these guys they're not really aware of how this comes across publicly, because do you really want like the public to have like that great of a misconception about you,
Yeah.
And because you'll see like a lot of times with these guys, that like they retire and you get to know them and it's like, yeah, actually that guy wasn't that, bad of a guy. And like, look, and I kind of get it. Okay. Because the pressure of professional sports, right? I don't think it's a good job, right? My son's 10 years old. Look, he's my kid. I'm sure genetically there are limitations there anyway, but like any kid, he's dreaming, right? And I was just telling him, look, this isn't a good job, man. Like the average career is like 4 years, you make it, let's just say, because everybody looks at like Kershaw, it's like, oh, the guy played like 20 years, whatever, made so much money, right? Like how great, whatever. Most guys like show up, they're on the right, they don't know if they're on the roster, even the established guys, right? Some guys in Double-A, everybody's talking about them, dude's coming to take your job, like, and there's a lot of pressure there, right? And I think we see people deal with this pressure like in various kinds of ways, right? My kind of like rule of thumb when I was the Dodgers beat guy was always, if I ran into a guy at night more than one time, he's not going to make it. And usually that's held true, right? Because, right, but like, again, I understand that too, because it's like, hey, look, I'm getting like, making major league money, getting a major league, like, per diem, and I'm on the road, I'm staying in a nice hotel. Like, let me live this. Like, I don't know how long this is going to last because I really don't know how good I am. Let me just like live it up because this could disappear tomorrow. Right now, in some ways, you're kind of giving up already at that point, right? Because like, okay, I don't know. I'm not really sure. Even if I give everything, I might not be able to stick around. Right. And so I might as well enjoy it. You know what I mean? And so like people deal with this pressure in various ways. I look at Rendon, and to me, it's just like a guy who just can't quite get himself to just say the truth, which is like, look, this is really bothering me. Right. I have pride, right? Whatever it is. Okay, maybe, I heard he was a really good high school basketball player, right? He's just overall a great athlete, I guess. And like, hey, maybe this wasn't my favorite sport, whatever, but I, as a professional, take pride in being able to, right, post every day and be doing these things. And I just can't, I think would actually go like a long way into like, just making fans feel better about the situation. And again, unfortunately for him, like, because I think, again, there's insecurity, and I think, a guy like that, especially, right, who's always performed like at a really high level, he probably thinks, well, why did people ever like me in the first place? It was because I was good. Well, now I'm not good. And if I say the truth, how about if they like reject me still? Then I've just like I've just like slipped my wrist in front of everybody and for no reason, and they still hate me, And I think that, like, again, because we forget too, right? These are like still like relatively young men,
Yeah.
I have a decade on Anthony Rendon, and I don't think like I'm that old, right? But like, right. So kind of like in the big scheme of things, as human beings, as an athlete, he might be at the tail end of things, but kind of in the big picture, these are still young people that are still kind of learning how to kind of process all these things. And like, again, a lot of these, in Rendon's case, he went to college, right. So he's been somewhat like socialized, I guess, but like, with a lot of these guys, you get drafted at 18 and you're put in with a bunch of other people in the similar situation. And, those are the majority of human contact you have. And then we kind of sit here wondering like, oh, like, why isn't he more enlightened? It's like, well, look at the surroundings. Right. So, to me, that's just kind of, I'm guessing, down the road at some point, right? Maybe in retirement or something, he'll talk and our view on this will be different. But yeah, he's definitely not handling this the best way possible. If I was, his personal PR person, I would definitely try to encourage him to, not be like a dick to the media, just because that doesn't really like help.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Bleed Los Podcast. Yo ha sido su servidor Juan Ramírez de parte de mi colega Babyface. Nos vemos para la próxima. This episode of the Bleed Los Podcast has been brought to you by betonline.ag, where the game starts.